It's a darn fine shooter, but it's not perfect. Having shot with the Pixel 6 Pro for over a month now, here are the things I think it gets right, and the things it doesn't as much get right. Starting off with the gooder stuff. Number one, the bigger main sensor is rad. The most obvious advantage of a bigger sensor is the greater potential to soak up light and deliver a shallower depth of field. On top of that, aesthetically, we also see improvements to pixel level detail. Now, Google waited a fair bit to make the jump. Instead of moving incrementally from year to year, the Pixel camera team leapt from one older camera sensor to this bleeding edge camera hardware. The wait might have been frustrating for some enthusiasts, but it did prevent the Pixel team from having the same generational teething pains that other companies have walked through. Now, things like poor autofocus performance on older pixel binning sensors. Instead, we got a continuity of performance with fewer compromises, and the improvements are more easily noticed. Number two, the telephoto is my jam. I'm usually an ultra-wide guy. I still feel most people interested in shopping a Pixel should probably opt for the regular Pixel 6 instead of the 6 Pro, but spending more gets you a critical advantage. This is one of, if not the best telephoto camera I've ever used on a phone. One of the largest sensors to be used with a periscoping lens, no gimmicky 100 times moon zoom. It's just a solid shooter at 4 times the focal length of the main camera and with the sensor that would have been a premium phone's primary camera maybe 2 years ago. It's the bummer of how casual our tech reviewing has become. I had to dig through some of the reporting on GSM Arena and DP Review to check my math. But if you see folks complain about the slower aperture on the Pixel compared to, say, an iPhone 13 Pro, those people are forgetting what happens when you change focal lengths. I have a separate video breaking that down, which you can watch, but the TLDW, the physical iris on the Pixel telephoto, is about 70% larger than on the iPhones. Blah, blah, techno speak, what does that mean? The Pixel telephoto has been the best indoor shooter for a telephoto I've ever used. Now, we tend to keep our homes kind of cozy, comfortable lighting, not a lot of production grade lights blasting in people's faces. So most phone zoom cameras struggle with this. They use tiny little sensors for better reach and that better crop factor. But when things get dark, very often you'll see the phone switch to the main sensor and just crop that image in. Yes, even on an iPhone 13 Pro. Image quality falls apart faster. It's generally just not worth it to zoom on a phone in darker conditions, except on the Pixel 6 Pro. Now, clarity and IQ aren't quite as sharp as on the main camera, obviously, but over the Thanksgiving holiday, getting to visit with some family for the first time in a couple years, the Pixel came in clutch as a candid shooter. 4 times the equivalent focal length meant many of my photos could be shot from across the room. That's more discreet, so I'm not distracting people by shoving a phone camera in their face to use the good sensor. And I think it's a more flattering look the way the background compresses behind your subject, and the sensor is good enough at soaking up light that I could often still freeze a moment with a minimum of blur or handshake messing up the shot. In the past, the Pixel team has shown a preference for telephoto performance. I think this is the first phone to deliver a significant enough advantage to warrant that preference. Number 3, stickier controls. Now, we don't get true manual controls, which still bugs me, but more controls this generation are sticky, which I do like. I've highlighted subject tracking before, and I still think this is amazing. I hate when a phone camera focus resets after like 3 seconds. I tap once, the Pixel just sticks on that subject unless the view significantly changes. That's the way all phone auto modes should be, full stop. Now, the big improvements this time are stickier exposure controls. It really ticks me off on another phone when I focus, change the exposure, the scene slightly changes, so I focus again, and then I have to reset the exposure. Especially if you're shooting a series of photos or videos, you can't keep that tiny little exposure adjustment consistent. The Pixel 6 now has sticky controls for highlights, lowlights, and white balance. That's incredibly handy. You make a few quick adjustments, then you can focus anywhere you need to, and when you're done, reset the adjustments to go back to full auto. I would prefer a traditional manual or pro mode to just lock those adjustments in place, but this is the next best thing. Number 4, video controls have gotten a little smarter. One of the things I like about the Pixel Camera app, you can see a lot of thought has gone into user experience and continuity. A huge gripe on a lot of phones, if the main camera can shoot 4K video at 60 frames per second, but the ultra wide can't, when you switch from the main camera to the ultra wide, it drops you to 4K 30. And I think that makes sense. But then if you switch back to the main camera, it'll often keep your video at 4K 30, even though you were shooting 4K 60. When you're trying to efficiently make adjustments on a small phone screen, it's pretty easy to switch those settings up by accident, and then it takes you 3 times longer to get back to the settings you had. I'm happy to see when a phone just locks you out of the ultra wide when shooting 4K 60 if that camera sensor can't handle it. Like the Pixel 6, the phone won't let you switch to those sensors if you tell the phone, this is the video quality I want. It sounds like a limitation, but it really is less frustrating this way. You're just gonna have to trust me. Better still, and this one's kind of cute. Let's say you're shooting 4K 30 and you're on the telephoto. If you switch to 4K 60, the Pixel will jump you back to the main camera sensor, but it returns at a 4 times crop to mimic the field of view you had from the dedicated telephoto. It's not as jarring a transition back to the main sensor. It maintains a composition continuity. There are a ton of little software considerations like this throughout the Pixel app, but that crop, that was my happiest find so far. And this is of course on top of all of the new stabilization options and the built-in audio controls to switch between cabled or Bluetooth microphones. Video on Pixels has gotten a lot smarter over the last 2 years. Okay, now moving from the gooder stuff to the not as gooder stuff, here are some things I hope can be addressed in future updates, and there is one hardware issue I think we're just gonna be stuck with. Number 1, the RAW files are kinda weak. Now, I appreciate that on a phone so built around auto HDR and streamlining the user experience that Google has included any kind of RAW support, but the way a Pixel saves a compressed RAW image, it just doesn't provide you quite the same editing opportunities as competing phones might. Also considering how good the JPEGs are from stacking image files, it would be kind of nice if we could get something similar in RAW, like the Vivo Super RAW or Apple's Pro RAW. I mean, obviously those are not true RAW images, but a computational DNG RAW file built for better editing. I'm gonna go ahead and stop saying RAW now. Moving on. Number 2, no full resolution modes. Marketing claims matter. If you're going to sell your product to the masses with big claims, you need to back those claims up. The main practical benefit of these newer pixel binning sensors isn't really getting a ton more resolution. It really is more about capturing light and HDR processing. But if you're gonna slap 50 megapixels and 48 megapixels on the marketing, then you should be able to offer those modes on the phone. Number 3, the video noise needs some tweaking. Now personally, I'm not bothered by noise in photos and videos. Even digital ISO noise can provide a texture or a feel to an image that I think improves the image. And I'd much rather have grain in a photo or video than see an overly aggressive filter blur out all of the detail in my shot and then over sharpen the image to compensate. That said, the Pixel's video, it needs some tweaking. And even in decently well lit environments, it's not difficult to demonstrate some distracting buzz in your videos. However these videos are being compressed and finished, if it even is an issue with video compression, something needs to be adjusted to smooth this out a little. Number 4, processing times are still kinda slow. Now, there's a ton of computational work happening in the background of the phone after you take a photo. One of the things I was hoping to see on the Pixel, with Google making their own Tensor SoC and including their own AI hardware on that SoC, knowing this phone is more powerful than any of the mid-ranger Pixels, the 6 Pro can finish a photo faster than a 5A, but it still feels kind of pokey compared to other premium tier phones, like on a Vivo, or even the recent OnePlus update. Those photos are basically ready before you can physically open up your photo gallery. And this runs doubly true for long exposure situations, where the Pixel's larger sensor should help it soak up more light faster, but we still have roughly the same hold steady times as on older Pixels. Wrapping this list up, number 5, the ultra-wide is just kinda more money went into this telephoto, and it totally shows. So the ultra-wide is handy in a one-button panorama kind of situation, but it definitely feels like the oldest part of this phone. No autofocus, only 4K video at 30 frames per second, no macro mode. So if you need a nice landscape, and especially when you don't need critical focus on one specific subject, that's kind of cool. But it's a fair bit less useful than many other competing phones. I mean, my LG V50 could shoot software stabilized video at 4K 60, and I've been crazy spoiled by the stunning ultra wide on the OnePlus 9s. The Pixel 6 just doesn't generate much excitement for the wide shooter, especially knowing that's a hardware choice likely made to save a little on manufacturing costs. As just a brief aside, because I have no concept of linear thought, if I could get the GN1 as the main camera, if I could maybe add the aperture control from the Xperia Pro I, I can then keep this Pixel 6 Pro periscope telephoto, and then I could staple on the OnePlus Ultra Wide. If I could put all of those camera sensors onto one phone, that would easily be my unicorn camera hardware wish device right now. But I digress. All right, folks, we're right on the heels of a major software update for the entire line of Pixel phones. I think a lot of us are anxious to see how Google's gonna polish up Android 12 in general, and then we're gonna take a closer look at what kind of camera improvements we might get specifically, especially checking out the 6 and 6 Pro. So if you've been shooting on a Pixel, what kind of improvements would you hope to see in a future update? Drop me some of them tasty comments down below. As always, thanks so much for watching, sharing these videos, subscribing to the channel. I greatly appreciate everyone who has been supporting this channel and all this production by checking out the links down underneath this video, maybe shopping a little merch. That kind of stuff really does help keep production rolling on this channel. Full list of all my affiliates and partnerships on SomeGadgetGuy.com, or you might consider, just maybe, joining the list of names scrolling by on your screen from my Patreon, patreon.com/SomeGadgetGuy. This is basically a list of the coolest tech pals in the universe, so I hope you'll check them out. Now, you know where you can find me around the rest of the internet, at SomeGadgetGuy on the Twitters and the Twitch, Facebooks and the Instagrams, and I will catch you all on the next video.